Hi everyone. In this video today, I'll be talking about secrets to moist cakes, especially if you're a baker. This is particularly for bakers who have not been baking maybe for a long time, but even if you're just looking for extra tips and you're wondering how can I make sure that my cakes each time are going to be moist? How can I make sure even after baking my cakes are going to be completely moist? So this is what I'll basically be talking about today. Um, So I will basically be sharing three particular topics today. So when I'm done with this live, these are the three things you're gonna know. One, I'm gonna be sharing 3 tips or 3 ways I ensure cakes are moist when I bake them. Right? We do it at Amari at our bakery workshop, and you can do the same. Number 2, or 2 tips on how to make sure the cake stays soft after baking. Right? There is during the process that helps you actually come out with cakes that are baked. Sorry, guys. And then after that is going to be like after they're baked, how do they stay soft and moist? So I'll be talking about that. And my bonus tip is going to be how to ensure when you bake your cake, it turns out super fluffy, super moist, right? So those are the things I'll be covering in this particular live. So today is a slightly different setup than the one I usually do, which is usually either a cake decoration or something. But every once in a while, I like trying to make sure that I share tips as well that can help you as a baker in general so that you can get better results. And if you have any questions in between the live or even after the repost, you can comment below if you've been struggling with getting moist cakes, and if I can, I'll definitely answer. So again, my name is Maureen Amari. In this channel, we share baking tips, cake decoration tutorials, and all manner of tips when it comes to baking and decoration. If this is something you're interested in, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. I am the founder and director of Baking with Amari, which is a business formerly known as Amari Baking Center. And we offer learning experiences, this is baking classes, both online or in Nairobi. We also sell recipe books, right? We have a recipe book that's out, printed, amazing, as well as the ebooks. We also do baking events every once in a while for anybody who wants to keep learning. And we actually do our physical classes in Nairobi on Gong Road, right? Arcade Discount Mall, shop number 51, ground floor. You can always just call ahead, visit if you're interested in taking physical classes. We also have online classes available as well. All right. Now, I'm going to get right into it so that I can try and keep this as short as possible and so that I can get you guys paying attention as much as possible. So, the 3 ways that I ensure cakes are moist when baked, and you can do the same thing too. Number 1, accurate knowledge of cake making. This is something that most people probably don't expect me to give as a tip, but the interesting thing, as a person who's been training people for like the last 7 years or 8 years, this is important because you actually have to know what you need to do to get a good cake result. If you don't know, that's why you keep getting, right, dry cakes or cakes that are not moist. So you actually have to understand cake making. You have to understand how baking and the type of techniques that you actually need to get you a good result, right, in the product that you're baking. So you actually have to understand things about cakes, that there's different types of cakes. Some people don't even know there's a difference between butter cakes and sponge cakes. And I will be linking all the links at the bottom because in this channel I've shared videos on mixing methods for cakes. I've shared types of cakes based on mixing methods. You have to know that so that you know, is this cake capable of being moist? If not, what can I do to make it moist? That kind of thing. So one of the things that I really stress upon bakers, right, especially if you're an amateur baker getting started, especially for those people who want to start selling but they don't understand how cake works, please understand the differences between the various types of cakes. Like for example, the top two, there's many others, but the top two ones are butter cakes and sponge cakes. Do you know that there's a difference between them? Right? What are you baking? Are you baking a butter cake? Are you baking a sponge cake? The techniques they use for this, do they give you soft and moist results in baking, right? Is it a butter cake? If it's a butter cake, you need to understand proper mixing method of a butter cake, which is creaming and folding, right? Are you doing a sponge cake? Do you know that some sponge cakes actually tend to be dry, right? It actually happens that way. And then there's some sponge cakes that tend to be moist, right? What specific type of sponge cake are you baking? Do you know that the proper mixing methods for a sponge cake are whisking and folding, and that there's a different type of folding method that you use when it comes to sponge cake, right? And my favorite example to use is this. These are two types of sponge cakes. One is a biscuit, and this one, when you bake it, tends to be dry. It's fluffy, it's soft, but it tends to be dry. So you have to add moisture before you decorate it. The next one on the right is a chiffon cake. You don't have to add moisture to that to enjoy it. It's actually quite moist by itself. And there's bakers who don't know this, right? So you keep wanting a moist cake, but you don't understand how these things work. So it's important to actually know the difference between them and what it takes to actually have something that is moist. And so in this first tip, my action for you is get the knowledge you need. Get the knowledge you need. There is tons of free content on the internet that can help you get there. You can watch videos, you can read blog articles. Like, we actually have tons of free content on this channel. We also have tons of free content on our blog, amaribakery.com, that you can actually go read, that can help you like 60%, right? You can purchase recipe books. Of course, I will tell you to, obviously, consider purchasing ours because it's amazing. 58 recipes tried and tested. But at the same time, find a recipe book that gives you the detail, not just the recipes, something that actually has explanations on techniques, methods, ingredients, tools like ours does. If you can take it the next level higher, take an online class with a person who knows what they're doing, with a professional baker who will not only teach you how to bake, but will teach you tips, tricks, techniques, and troubleshooting. We do that in our online classes. Also, you can take the best option always for learning is hands on. Can you find somebody who can teach you, a professional baker who can teach you hands on? Do you know someone who can take you in as an apprentice? If not, can you sign up the baking classes yourself? If so, please do, because you're going to get extra tips that are really, really going to help you. So that's my first tip for you on getting moist cakes. It's not the usual, but it's important. Second one, use of proper ingredients and measures. So this is a three-part thing. Have a good recipe, use quality ingredients and substitutes. No shortcuts, guys, because a lot of people realize, especially Kenyan bakers, they will take shortcuts and then they'll DM me and ask me, why is my cake not moist? When I really ask questions, they have shortcutted the whole thing. That's why. So, why is it important to have a good recipe? Because it's tried and tested. So, if it's tried and tested, and you follow the proper, creaming and folding or whatever it is you follow the directions, you bake as long as you need to. If it is a good recipe and you follow it to the T, it will always give you a good result. And it doesn't matter. By the way, if a recipe is good, guys, it doesn't matter who's doing it, whether it's you, whether it's your sibling, or if you have a bakery, whether it's somebody else baking, it should always give you a good result. And just to give you an example, just tooting our own horn just a little bit, if you have a recipe and then multiple people try it, these are the kind of results you want. Like, every time people try our recipes, this is the feedback they give us. Like, this is somebody, she says black forest, but it's actually a chocolate sponge. Not only does she like it, look at the actual results of the cake. This is recent. Like, one of our online student took a course, and this is her chocolate cake, right? These are results after our students attended a practical class from multiple times. This one is from 2021. This one is from 2018, right? Moist cakes inside, same recipes. This is results from our recipe books from like last year and last year. The point is, if you follow the recipes to a T and it's a good recipe, it should always give you a good result. So sometimes the reason your cake is moist is you don't have a good recipe that doesn't have the right balance of ingredients. So get a good recipe. The second part of that is use quality ingredients or substitutes. So, for example, don't use butter that's about to spoil. It's going to give you an extra taste. Don't use milk that is going to spoil, even though that one sometimes I might tell you to use if it's buttermilk. Don't use, just don't use bad eggs, right? Just use high quality ingredients. If possible, use butter. If not, you can use substitutes like margarine. use the same exact quantity. Don't reduce or increase thinking it's going to help. If your recipe tells you use unsalted butter, use unsalted butter. If you can't find it, like ours, will say use unsalted butter or margarine. Use the margarine. Same exact measure, guys. And then the recipe will tell, like ours tells you, if you don't use the unsalted butter, use margarine, don't add salt. Follow instructions to the T. If that person knows what they're doing, it's going to work out. Don't substitute water for milk. If you're lactose intolerant, maybe stay away from cakes or specific types of cakes. But don't use water for milk. There's a purpose of milk. Like in our book, I basically put in each ingredient and what it does, including milk, which helps you get a soft and moist result. So please don't change things up as is said in the recipe. If you know it's a tried and tested recipe book, don't change up. Just use it exactly as it is. And we have this problem with people. They'll buy the ebook and change things. I'm like, first do the recipe exactly as it's written with the right ingredients. Then you can go changing stuff, right? For butter cakes especially, realize that when you're using butter and sugar to cream, or margarine and sugar to cream, those two ingredients need to interact a certain way to give you a certain result that makes your cake soft, fluffy, and moist. So most people will be like, oh, I don't like a lot of sugar, and they'll use half of it. That sugar had a function to make your cake moist and soft. And then you tell me your cake isn't soft. If you don't want sugary things, stay away from cakes, because every ingredient, including sugar, has a function to give you that moist cake. You can reduce a little bit, but don't go changing a recipe and then wondering why it's not giving you the results you want. So most of the time, please use quality ingredients, do not substitute. And the final part of this, no shortcuts. Most people are impatient. Like one of the thing that happens when you're creaming, if you guys know what creaming is, it's mixing sugar and fat. You have to do it for a long time. If you don't have a mixer, it's tiresome. But in class, we'll have our student mix the 5 minutes if they need to, so that they can get the soft and fluffy and moist cake. If you don't do that, you don't get the recipe that you're looking for. And that's why your cake is not moist. So stop being impatient, stop being in a hurry. Do what you need to do to the capacity you're supposed to. If you're supposed to cream until it's white and fluffy, do it, right? If you're looking to make cheap cakes, people will reduce stuff and then wonder why the cake is not moist. Again, if you have shortcuts, this will not give you the right cake. So if you go reducing eggs, you've cut the fat or you've removed it. Sometimes even changing the fat. Like I've told you, use butter or use margarine, and you've used oil. Oil is good, and sometimes it has function in cake, but when you replace it, sometimes it doesn't give you the result that I'm looking for. So please use the proper techniques, however long you're supposed to. Don't shortcut, and you'll get good recipe and you'll get good cakes that are moist. So that's the other thing about that. My third tip is better moist cake results by using specific ingredients. So once you have understood things and you're using all the correct ingredients and the measures, a third way of getting soft cakes is by using a specific ingredient that makes your cake soft. Now, this is specifically for butter cakes. If you use something that's slightly acidic, this is a very big tip. It's usually a very good tip. If you use something that has a slightly acidic content, and I say slightly acidic, not too acidic, it actually helps your cake become moist. And the best example of this is buttermilk, which you can make yourself by taking some milk, putting in some vinegar and spoiling it, or buying buttermilk, like taking cream, beating it, separating into butter, and the liquid is called buttermilk. If you're in a region where they sell buttermilk, you can buy it. Another thing you can do is use yogurt, because it's, like fermented, so it also has a slightly acidic content. The third thing, if you're in Kenya, you can use something like mala. That also works. It softens your cake. So instead of using milk, you can substitute the mala or the yogurt or the buttermilk, and it gives you a really, really, really good result. I haven't written this, but I have another bonus tip for you guys. If you're making cakes, you can either use cake flour to get moist results, or for every 1 cup of all-purpose flour, remove 2 tablespoons, replace them with cornstarch, right? Cornstarch. I know in Kenya sometimes they write it as corn flour. I mean cornstarch. Put it in there and mix it up. And what it does, it kind of sort of reduces the gluten content in your flat and makes your cake crumb become so soft. We do that for our chiffon cakes for sale. We use corn flour in there to make it, that crumb a little bit softer. So you can either use something that has a slightly acidic content, or you can use cornstarch to replace part of the flour to make it really, really good and soft and moist and fluffy. I guarantee you, I've done this multiple times. We do this in our classes, our recipes, cakes we're selling. It works, right? It definitely works. Now, to give you an example of like cakes that naturally use a slightly acidic ingredient that helps them be moist. If you've ever eaten a cake that's a red velvet or a lemon cake made properly, you will realize that red velvets tend to be very soft and moist. Our lemon cakes tend to be soft and moist. Why? They're using acidic ingredient. Like red velvet uses buttermilk, right? Or milk with vinegar. Lemon cake uses the one that uses lemon juice, right? Not just the one with the rind. That is acidic. So it makes you have a slightly acidic ingredient that gets that. It just kind of makes that texture of cake just really, really soft. Trust me on this. It's really good. But don't overdo it. Slightly acidic, not all the acid in there, right? Now, the last thing I want to share is 2 tips to make sure that your cake stays soft after baking. Because when you do the things after the first 3 things that I've told you, you know the right texture, you're using the right ingredients, you have a good recipe, and you do the tips I've shared with you. That's now to make sure when you bake the cake, it's moist. Now, I have 2 tips for you to make sure that the cake stays moist after baking. But before that, I just want to mention really quickly, like I just showed you guys screenshots of our testimonials, we actually have a book. So our main book, this printed one, we have the ebook version, and it's 500 shillings for Kenyan purchases, $5 for non-Kenyan purchases. You can get it directly from us. I'm going to link below. But at the same time, we have it on Amazon. So I'm going to put the link for Amazon below. And with Amazon, if you're in an international space, you can also do the hard copy. However, if you're in Kenya, you can buy this book for 1800 as well. We are delivering anywhere in Kenya. The thing is, you do have to pay for delivery. If you just want to collect, you can just collect at our Gong Road workshop Mondays to Friday. Just call ahead. Okay. So if you want tried and tested recipes, these are 58 recipes that are tried and tested and they work for you, and they've worked for multiple regions. We've had them work for people in Botswana. I had somebody in Japan actually try something and it worked. So these recipes are tried and tested. If you want to take an online class, consider taking our 2,500 shilling class. It's a 90-day beginner cake decoration class, cake making and decoration. I'm going to put a link below. Or you can attend our physical class in Nairobi. We have a 5-day cake 101 class that's 22,000, and you can choose to at least learn properly. I tell people it's important to learn properly so that you're able to actually get good results each time. Now, when it comes to after baking, keeping your cake moist after baking, here's my 2 tips for you. Number 1, proper cooling and storage. And people don't think this is important, but I actually physically found this out myself. I had read about it, but then at one point it started happening to our cakes and I realized what was happening. So for best results, cool your cakes at room temperature, like just regular temperature. Bake the cakes, remove them from the pan, leave them at room temperature. At least the first hour, guys, at least the first hour. If possible, 2 hours. Let them cool naturally. If you don't do that, sometimes it causes problems, and I'm going to explain that. Now, once they cool down like 2 hours at room temperature, then cling film them, right? Cover them up, or place in an airtight container. So that's going to make sure that your cake doesn't dry out, which means that you have a moist cake after that, right? So it just takes care of that moistness by itself. Now, the reason I'm telling you to give it an hour or two, I know that a lot of bakers, especially when we're in a hurry, we will bake that cake, we'll cut it, or we'll throw it in the fridge really quickly. That is something we had started doing, and it's a problem because it causes something called thermal shock. Thermal shock is actually something that's covered in physics and all that, but to keep it simple, what it is an extreme temperature change. It's like from going from hot to cold, right? Just that's all it is. It's shocking the thermalness or whatever, right? So it's an extreme temperature change. When you're dealing with cakes, like butter cakes or specifically sponge cakes, When you cool that too fast, like you go from hot, extreme, your cake was in an oven that was 180 degrees Celsius or 350 degrees Fahrenheit. When you move it into a minus degree container, it's going to have thermal shock. And what happens is that those air bubbles or the aeration that had happened inside your cake that made it soft and moist and fluffy, they quickly deflate really quickly. And when it goes in there, it actually becomes dense. And we started noticing this because the cake somehow would even sort of crunch in, like almost like form into itself. And when you eat that cake later, okay, it'll be a little soft, but it won't be the softness that we were used to. And I did an experiment and discovered that thermal shock is an actual thing if you speed up that cooling process really quickly in the fridge, right? So what you want to do is those air pockets, you don't want them to deflate quickly. When a cake cools at room temperature, it cools naturally, which means it's going to set nicely with the fluffiness and the moistness. When it gets there within the first hour or two, then you can take that cake when it has settled nicely and you're going to put it in the fridge and it's going to maintain the structure. But when it's too hot, it's still kind of fragile. So you speed that process up and everything collapses, and you don't want that. So you want to try as much as possible. I know we're in a hurry, bakers, most of the time. Try. Give it 30 minutes. Give it 1 hour at least. If possible, don't take orders that will force you to have to do that, right? It just doesn't taste very well. And especially if your selling point is quality, that's going to be an issue for you because you want to maintain that softness, right? So you don't want thermal shock happening to your cake. This is an example of what happens, by the way, guys. As you can see, it's dense. You either get small pockets of denseness in between, especially. Sometimes it happens on top. If you've ever had a cake like on top get dense and then sticky, that's something else that's happening. The cake on the right, as you can see, is very dense. It's just like dense. It almost collapses into itself. And again, if you're selling quality cakes or you're selling, oh, my cakes are moist, you really don't want that to happen. Am I telling you you can never cool your cake in a fridge? If you want to, you can, right? You can still cool a cake quickly in the fridge if you want to, but wait 30, give it time to set really nicely, right? Please note, by the way, this thermal shock thing happens to both butter cakes and sponge cake, and it's worse for sponge cake. I've had this happen to a chiffon cake. It's irreversible. You can't change it. I actually baked the cake again. So after you cool properly, right, without the thermal shock and everything, remember to keep it moist, you have to put it in a cling film or in an airtight container. So what happens is obviously if your cake after an hour or two is exposed to the air, it starts drying out, right? The air will sort of dry it out and the moisture escapes. And you don't want that. So you want to make sure you're cling filming your cakes or you're putting them in a cool, airtight container. And then make sure it's either a cool, dry place or it's placed in a fridge. But now the interesting thing about storing cake in your fridge, I don't know if you guys have ever noticed this. Again, I do a lot of experiments. If you're delivering your cake, if you're serving guests, if you yourself are eating cake, if you remove the cake from the fridge, please give it time to come back to room temperature. Because there's fat molecules in there, there's all these stuff. They have come together and they have just kind of coagulated together. There's proteins. You have to let it come back to room temperature, to this regular sort of consistency and texture. That's the best time to eat the cake. So I'm sure some of you have done this or you've ever eaten a cake that's cold, probably because that person put it in the fridge, decorated it, and delivered it before it had come to room temperature. I'm not saying it's always a bad cake. It's just not the best experience. So I always tell bakers when we're teaching them to decorate, remove your cake 2 hours before, decorate it, or decorate when it's cold, leave it out for 2 hours before dispatching into your client so that the client can eat it when it has come to room temperature and it tastes good. It's soft, it's fluffy, and moist. You might not realize this. Maybe you've lost a client because the client thinks your cake is too dense. And all it was that you decorated it when it's cool and delivered to them before it had come to room temperature. That happened to one of our instructors once, where the cake had just been in the fridge. And so she told her client, hey, can you just leave it out for 2 hours and taste it? And the client was fine with it. So sometimes it's important to know that your cake will taste differently or more moist when it's in certain conditions. So one of the things I'll tell you is, again, if you're delivering, deliver 2 or 3 hours. By the time the people are eating it, it has come to room temp. If you're serving, make sure you remove it 2 or 3 hours before. A tip, if you're in a hurry, and this is at home, this is if it's at home or like a hotel. I actually learned this tip when I was working in a hotel once. If you want to serve a cake that's moist, but the cake was in the fridge and you're in a hurry, stick it in the microwave 10 seconds or 15 seconds. You can do 10 seconds, 10 seconds, 10 seconds, or 15 seconds, depending on the size of the cake. That cake, when you microwave it, that instant heat will hit the moisture that's in the cake and create like steam inside. And then it just kind of like creates air pockets again. It's a really interesting thing. Do it with like no frosting. Try it out once, guys. Like cut a cake that's made in the fridge, put it in the microwave 10 seconds, and then, or like just make sure it's evenly warmed up. Taste it. It's amazing. It actually works for both butter cakes and sponge cakes. So that's something that can kind of help you, but butter cake's better. That can kind of help you if you are trying to get the cake to taste good really quickly, that was in the fridge, and you want people to think that it's a good thing. The second tip for having a moist cake after you've baked it, this particularly is my tip for sponge cakes. What happens with sponge cakes is that some of them, like I mentioned, like a biscuit or genoise or even an angel food cake, they tend to be dry. So you generally want to decorate those cakes before giving them to people to eat. The only way you can moisten that cake is using syrup. So most of you probably know this. Make some sugar syrup, moisten the cake with the sugar syrup, decorate it, and then um, give your client or your people, your friends or whatever. That's how you moisten a cake after baking. That's a sponge cake. My disclaimer on this, because my butter cake recipes are always moist, I don't suggest putting syrup in butter cakes. It doesn't make sense to me if your recipe is the correct recipe. The only time I suggest this on a butter cake is one, if you're the type of people who tend to make big structure cakes or 3D cakes that need a dry cake. There's that kind of thing that happens. And so obviously you might need to moisten that so that when people are eating the cake, they don't think it's too dry. Or wedding cakes that are very elaborate and they need a well-structured cake. But if not, your butter cake should be moist, guys. You should not be doing dry stuff, right? It's not supermarket cake here. So, as long as you have a good butter cake recipe, you shouldn't need moistening. If you have a sponge cake, biscuit, angel food cake, or genoise, then you can moisten with some syrup. And it's easy to make it, or you can just buy filling, use the liquid as a syrup. But if you just boil water and sugar and throw in some blueberries, depending on the flavor of the cake you make, you can make your own syrup. Like, for example, when you are moistening a black forest or like a white forest, right? Like on the left, this is our students. As you can see, there's a little bit of red in the cake. They literally did this last week. And there's cherry syrup on that. And this is an example also of a black forest with cherry syrup, right? Just moisten the layers. Cut the cake, tort the cake. Make sure both sides, you've put syrup on both sides, right? And then now you can assemble the cake as you prefer. Again, you can actually make your own syrup, like I've showed you here with the blueberries. And this is a basically forest cake that's been assembled after the syrup has happened, right? So, like I mentioned, 3 ways of making sure your cakes are moist. That's making sure you understand the concepts of mixing and baking correctly. Make sure you have good ingredients, you use them as you should, and you have a good recipe. Sorry, you have good ingredients, and third, you have a good recipe. All right. For the other 2 tips after baking, make sure that you are not causing thermal shock to your cakes. You're cooling them properly and you're storing them properly. And finally, you can moisten a cake if it's a sponge cake if you want it to be nice and moist afterwards. I hope these 5 tips have helped you. And a bonus tip on how to make a cake that's very, very soft and moist. If it's a butter cake, use acidic ingredient, and also you can use cake flour as well. It'll definitely help you. I hope this has helped you. Do comment below if it has. If you have any questions on cake troubleshooting, if you have issues that happen with your cake, feel free to comment. I will check the comments later and I'll definitely answer on text. If I feel that it can be a live that I can cover next time, I can definitely cover it so it can help you guys. All right. I'll see you guys in the next video. Make sure if you're interested in our books or classes, check the link below if you want to DM us. And make sure to watch the next video. I'll see you guys next time.